You killed my mother for your empire. I'm not your shadow. I'm her roots. The fierce cry of a determined black educator echoes through a lavish room, her hands shattering a family frame, a candle raised like a torch of defiance. As a teacher who's fought to uplift her community, she's endured relentless scorn from a wealthy white family, mocked for her humble job, belittled for her skin, and forced to serve while her deaf son is ignored and shamed. Betrayed by a husband who once loved her, she's faced isolation and injustice in a house that never felt like home. Yet from the ashes of a 20-year-old secret, a fire ignites. Will she reclaim her mother's legacy and rise above the cruelty, or will the past bury her dreams forever? The journey is just beginning, filled with twists that will leave you on edge. Subscribe to our channel to catch the latest episodes of this gripping tale and share where you're watching from. Let's see our global family grow. What hidden truths will unravel next? Stay tuned to find out. The rain fell in relentless sheets, a cold deluge that turned the narrow porch into a glistening stage under the bruised sky. Tomia Jackson stood there, her silhouette framed by the flickering street lamp, its amber glow struggling against the storm. Her braids, dark and heavy with moisture, clung to her cheeks, while the thin fabric of her worn coat sagged against her frame, soaked through to the skin. Across the sodden street, the Grayson mansion loomed like a fortress of glass and stone, its windows ablaze with golden light that mocked the gloom enveloping her modest haven. A gust whipped through, tugging at her resolve, but she remained rooted, her gaze fixed on the mailbox teetering at the curb. Her fingers, trembling from the chill, pried open the rusted lid, revealing a single envelope, its edges frayed and damp. The paper yielded beneath her touch, and as she unfolded it, the faint scent of aged ink mingled with the rain. The handwriting was a delicate scrawl, unfamiliar yet hauntingly intimate, each word etched with an urgency that pierced the silence. Tamia's breath caught as her eyes traced the lines, a message from a voice long silenced. Her mother, Lorraine. The words danced before her, a cryptic revelation, a forced relinquishment of a vast inheritance, a legacy tied to the Grayson name, and a hint that the accident claimed as her mother's end might harbor darker truths. Her heart thudded, a drumbeat against the storm's rhythm, as the weight of the unknown settled into her bones. The porch creaked beneath her shifting weight, a reminder of the fragile world she inhabited. Inside, the cramped space she called home offered little solace, walls thin enough to echo the distant laughter from the mansion, a cot that sagged under her restless nights, and a single bulb casting jagged shadows. Yet in that moment, the letter became a beacon, its ink a lifeline to a past she'd been denied. Tamia's mind raced, piecing together fragments of memory. A lullaby hummed in a voice she could scarcely recall, a sketchbook hidden under her mother's bed, the sudden void left by a supposed crash. The storm outside seemed to mirror the tumult within her, each raindrop a question unanswered. She stepped back into the shelter of the overhang, the envelope clutched against her chest as if it could shield her from the chill. The mansion's lights pulsed like a heartbeat, a stark contrast to the dimness surrounding her. Tamia's thoughts drifted to the whispers she'd overheard as a child, murmurs of a wealthy grandfather, a family torn by secrets, and a mother who fought until her last breath. The letter hinted at a struggle, a battle waged and lost, and now it seemed the fight had fallen to her. Her lips parted, a soft exhale fogging the air, as she resolved to unravel the mystery, driven by a flicker of defiance that warmed her against the cold. The rain intensified, drumming a relentless tattoo on the roof as Tamia moved to the edge of the porch, her eyes narrowing against the downpour. The Grayson estate stood impervious, its grandeur a silent taunt, and she felt the sting of every sidelong glance, every hushed insult she'd endured within those walls. The letter's words looped in her mind, a forced signature, a stolen birthright, a death shrouded in doubt. Her fingers traced the paper's creases, each fold's a testament to time's passage, and a surge of determination coursed through her. This was no mere relic. It was a call to action, a thread leading back to the woman who'd shaped her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Inside, the air grew heavy with the scent of wet wood and damp fabric as Tamia sank onto a rickety chair. The letter spread before her on a scarred table. The script was uneven, as if written in haste or despair, and the final lines bore a smudge, perhaps a tear or a raindrop from long ago. "They'll never let you have it," it warned, "but it's yours by blood." The ambiguity gnawed at her, a puzzle demanding resolution. Who were they? Was it the shadowy figures of her childhood nightmares, or the very people whose laughter now rang from the mansion? Her pulse quickened, a mix of fear and resolve, as she imagined the life her mother might have lived, free, proud, unburdened by the chains of others' greed. The storm outside seemed to pause, a momentary hush that amplified the creak of the floorboards under her feet as she paced. Tamia's reflection flickered in a cracked mirror, her dark eyes alight with a fire she hadn't known she possessed. The letter was more than a confession. It was a mirror to her strength, a reflection of a woman who'd defied the odds before being silenced. She pressed the paper to her lips, a silent vow to honor that legacy, to peel back the layers of deceit that had defined her life. The mansion's lights flickered, as if sensing her intent, and a shiver ran down her spine. Not from the cold, but from the certainty that this night marked the beginning of something irreversible. Tamia moved to the window, the glass streaked with rain, and peered into the tempest. The Grayson estate stood as a sentinel, its silhouette a constant reminder of the power that had overshadowed her existence. Yet within her grasp lay a key to that power, a truth that could shift the balance. Her mind churned with possibilities, confrontation, escape, or a quiet unraveling of the lies. The letter's weight in her hand anchored her, a tangible link to a mother she'd lost too soon, and she felt a surge of protectiveness, not just for herself, but for the memory of Lorraine. The storm resumed its fury, a symphony of nature's rage, and Tamia stood tall, her silhouette a solitary figure against the chaos, ready to step into the unknown. The rain tapered to a drizzle, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet earth and possibility. Tamia folded the letter with care, tucking it into her coat, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. The mansion's lights dimmed slightly as if retreating from her newfound resolve, and she turned from the window, her footsteps echoing with purpose. This was no longer just a night of sorrow, it was the dawn of her awakening. The letter's words lingered, a whisper in her soul, urging her toward a path she couldn't yet see clearly. With each breath, she steeled herself, the storm outside a mere echo of the tempest brewing within, ready to face whatever lay ahead in the shadow of the Grayson legacy. The grand hall of the Grayson estate shimmered with opulence, crystal chandeliers casting a kaleidoscope of light across polished marble floors. Tamia Jackson moved through the throng, her hands steady as she balanced a silver tray laden with delicate hors d'oeuvres, the aroma of truffle and caviar mingling with the clink of fine glassware. Her uniform, a stark black apron over a faded dress, marked her as an outsider amid the sea of tailored suits and glittering gowns. Laughter rippled through the air, a symphony of privilege that grated against her ears, and she kept her gaze low, avoiding the piercing stares that followed her every step. The weight of the night pressed down, a silent burden she carried with practiced grace. At the room's center, Leonard presided like a monarch, his silver hair catching the chandelier's glow, his voice a low rumble as he regaled guests with tales of empire. Beside him, Clarice twirled a champagne flute, her crimson dress a flare of arrogance, while Marcus lingered near the hearth, his broad shoulders tense beneath a bespoke jacket. Their eyes converged on Tamia as she approached, and the air thickened with unspoken disdain. Clarice's lips curled into a sneer, her voice cutting through the din. "Behold our little servant in black, utterly devoid of refinement, Tamia." The words landed like shards, and a ripple of chuckles followed, the guest's amusement a blade against her dignity. Tamia's fingers tightened around the tray, the metal cool against her skin, but she maintained her composure, offering a plate to a guest with a forced smile. Leonard's gaze, cold and unyielding, swept over her, a silent judgment that needed no words. His presence dominated the space, a patriarch whose wealth seemed to insulate him from empathy. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his blue eyes flickering with a shadow of regret. Yet he remained mute, his silence a betrayal that stung deeper than the other's taunts. The room pulsed with their privilege, a world where her presence was tolerated only as a tool, not a person. A small figure hovered at her side. Jaden, his slight frame dwarfed by the grandeur. His dark curls framed a face marked by a quiet resilience. Though his hearing impairment left him isolated, his attempts to communicate through hesitant gestures ignored by the crowd. Clarice's laughter sharpened as she glanced at him. And that pitiful child of hers, a blemish on our gathering, truly pitiable. The remark drew a chorus of stifled giggles, and Jaden's shoulders slumped, his small hand reaching for Tamia's skirt. She squeezed his fingers gently, a silent promise amid the storm of derision, her heart aching with a mother's fury she dared not unleash. The tray trembled slightly as Tamia moved to the next cluster of guests, their conversations a blur of wealth and status, each word a reminder of her exclusion. Clarice sauntered closer, her heels clicking like a metronome of scorn. Does she think that apron makes her one of us, a colored maid with no place here? The venom in her tone was palpable, and Leonard's nod of approval sealed the insult, his expression a mask of indifference. Tamia's breath hitched, but she channeled the hurt into a steely resolve, her movements deliberate as she served, each step a quiet rebellion against their cruelty. Marcus lingered near the fireplace, his gaze darting between Tamia and his family, a storm brewing behind his stoic facade. Once his eyes had held warmth, a fleeting connection forged in quieter moments. But now they reflected a man torn by loyalty and shame. He turned away, pouring himself a drink, the clink of glass punctuation to his cowardice. Tamia caught the gesture, her chest tightening with a mix of sorrow and anger. The man who had once vowed to stand by her now stood apart, his silence a louder wound than Clarice's barbs. The hall's grandeur seemed to mock her further, the ornate moldings and gilded frames a testament to a legacy she was deemed unworthy to touch. Jaden tugged at her again, his eyes wide with confusion, and she knelt briefly, signing a reassurance with trembling hands. The guest's laughter swelled, a wave crashing over her efforts to shield him, and Clarice's voice rose above it. Look at her fussing over that defective boy. Hardly Grayson material. The word defective sliced through the air, and Tamia's vision blurred with rage, though she rose slowly, maintaining her facade. The evening wore on, the air growing heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken tensions. Tamia navigated the room, her tray a shield against the onslaught, her mind racing with each insult. Leonard's occasional glance carried a weight of authority, as if her presence were a tolerated nuisance, while Clarice's taunts grew bolder, her words a dance of cruelty. Marcus remained a silent sentinel, his inaction a betrayal that gnawed at her. Yet his fleeting looks suggested a conflict she couldn't decipher. The disparity between their worlds, her struggle against their ease, fueled a fire within her, an ember waiting to blaze. As the clock chimed, signaling a shift in the gathering, Tamia retreated to the periphery, Jaden clinging to her side. The guest chatter faded into a dull roar, but the sting of their words lingered, a tattoo on her spirit. Clarice's laughter echoed as she recounted a jest at Tamia's expense, and Leonard's approving nod cemented their alliance against her. Marcus drained his glass, his back turned, a figure of lost potential. Tamia's gaze hardened, her resolve hardening with each breath. The night had stripped her bare, yet it had also kindled something fierce, a determination to rise above the mire of their contempt. The tray grew lighter as the evening waned, the last of the hors d'oeuvres claimed by indifferent hands. Tamia's arms ached, her spirit battered but unbowed, as she guided Jaden toward the kitchen's shadows. The hall's warmth receded, replaced by the cool sterility of service quarters. Yet her mind buzzed with the evening's affronts. Clarice's venom, Leonard's coldness, Marcus's silence. They wove a tapestry of injustice she could no longer ignore. Jaden's small hand in hers anchored her, his vulnerability a mirror to her own, and she vowed silently to shield him from this world that deemed him less. The kitchen door swung shut behind them, muffling the revelry, and Tamia leaned against the counter, her breath uneven. The chandelier's light filtered through a small window, casting fractured patterns on the tiles, a reflection of her fractured reality. She glanced at Jaden, his trusting eyes seeking hers, and felt a surge of protectiveness. The evening's humiliations had not broken her. They had forged her. As the mansion's laughter faded into the distance, Tamia's thoughts turned inward, a plan taking shape amid the echoes of scorn, her spirit a quiet storm, ready to challenge the dynasty that sought to crush her. The first light of dawn crept through the tangled vines of the Grayson garden, a fragile glow that painted the dew-kissed roses in hues of amber and rose. Tamia Jackson stepped onto the dew-soaked earth, her boots sinking slightly into the soft soil, the coolness seeping through to her soles. The air carried the earthy scent of damp petals and freshly turned dirt, a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of the mansion behind her. Her breath formed faint clouds as she exhaled, the tension of the previous night still coiled within her, a tight knot beneath her ribcage. Ahead, a figure moved among the blooms. Miss May, her hands deftly pruning with a pair of shears, her gray hair catching the morning's tentative rays. Tommy approached, her steps deliberate, the hem of her coat brushing against the foliage. Miss May paused, her weathered face lifting to reveal eyes that held a lifetime of stories. A faint smile curved her lips, warm yet tinged with sorrow, as she gestured to Tamia. "You carry a heaviness today, child," she murmured, her voice a soft rasp that seemed to blend with the rustle of leaves. Tamia nodded, her fingers brushing the fabric of her sleeve where the letter's memory lingered, a silent acknowledgement of the burden she bore. The older woman's gaze softened, and she reached into the pocket of her apron, withdrawing a small tarnished key that glinted in the light. "This belonged to your mama," Miss May said, pressing the key into Tamia's palm. Its metal was cool, etched with faint initials that hinted at a past long buried. She was a vision, you know, threads and colors dancing under her hands, creating beauty where others saw none. Lorraine had a spirit that couldn't be caged, not until they snuffed it out. Her words hung heavy, laced with a reverence that stirred something deep within Tamia. She turned the key over, its weight a tangible link to the woman she'd lost, and felt a shiver of anticipation ripple through her. Miss May's hands returned to the roses, snipping with a precision born of years as she continued. "Leonard, her brother by blood, though you'd never guess it by his heart, saw her talent as a threat. He forced her to sign away what was hers, a fortune tied to this very soil." Her shears paused, and she met Tamia's gaze, her eyes glistening. "She fought, oh, she fought, but they broke her spirit before they took her life." The revelation settled like a stone in Tamia's chest, a mix of awe and outrage fueling her pulse. She clutched the key tighter, its edges biting into her skin, a physical anchor to the tale unfolding. The garden seemed to hold its breath, the morning stillness amplifying Miss May's voice as she leaned closer. "There's a place up in the attic, hidden behind the old trunks. She left something there, something they never found. Use this to unlock it." Tamia's mind raced, picturing the dusty rafters of the mansion, a sanctuary of secrets waiting to be unearthed. The older woman's hand rested briefly on her arm, a gesture of solidarity, before returning to her task. Tamia nodded her resolve, hardening, the key now a talisman of her mother's defiance. She ventured back toward the house, the key nestled in her fist, its presence a quiet pulse against her skin. The mansion's rear entrance creaked as she slipped inside, the air shifting from the garden's freshness to the musty stillness of neglected corridors. Her footsteps echoed softly on the worn wood, each sounds a heartbeat in the vast silence. The attic stairs loomed ahead, steep and shadowed, and she ascended with cautious determination, the key's weight guiding her upward. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing through cracked shutters, casting a ghostly glow over the cluttered space. Tamia's eyes adjusted to the dimness, scanning the jumble of forgotten relics, suitcases with peeling leather, a cracked violin case, stacks of yellowed papers. She moved toward the far wall, where a heavy trunk sat beneath a cobweb-draped beam. The lock yielded to the key with a reluctant click, and she lifted the lid, a cloud of dust rising to greet her. Inside lay a bundle of fabric, its edges frayed but vibrant with color, and beneath it, a sheaf of documents bound with a faded ribbon. Her fingers trembled as she untied the knot, revealing legal pages stamped with the Grayson crest. each line a testament to her mother's claim. The papers detailed a forced relinquishment, Lorraine's signature scrawled under duress, alongside notes in her hand, sketches of designs, pleas for justice, and a final entry. For my daughter when she's ready. Tamia's throat tightened, the words a bridge across 2 decades, connecting her to a woman who'd fought to leave her a legacy. The fabric unfolded to reveal a half-finished dress, its stitches uneven but bold. A silent cry of creativity silenced too soon. She traced the seams, her touch reverent, feeling the echo of her mother's spirit in every thread. The attic's air grew thick with emotion as Tamia sifted through the trove, each document a piece of a puzzle she was only beginning to assemble. A ledger listed assets, hotels, land, wealth beyond her imagining, stolen through coercion. Her breath hitched as she realized the magnitude of what had been taken, the injustice that had shaped her life. The dress lay across her lap, a fragile shield against the cold, and she imagined Lorraine's hands at work, defying the odds until the end. The space seemed to pulse with her mother's presence, a whisper of strength urging her forward. Tamia gathered the papers, her movements careful yet resolute, tucking them into her coat alongside the key. The attic's shadows seemed to recede, the light growing bolder as if approving of her discovery. She stood, the dress draped over her arm, its weight a comfort as she descended the stairs. The mansion's silence enveloped her, but it no longer felt oppressive. Now it was a challenge, a battlefield where she would reclaim what was hers. Her steps quickened, the fabric brushing against her legs, a banner of resilience she carried into the unknown. Outside, the garden awaited, Miss May's figure a distant sentinel among the roses. Tamia paused at the threshold, the documents pressing against her chest, the dress a vivid reminder of her purpose. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that stretched toward the mansion, and she felt a surge of determination. The past had gifted her a weapon, and she intended to wield it with the same fierce grace her mother once had. With each breath, she steeled herself, the attic's revelations a flame that would guide her through the trials ahead, igniting a path toward justice. The heavy oak door of the Grayson study creaked open, revealing a sanctum of power cloaked in shadows. Tamia Jackson stepped inside, her boots muffled by the thick Persian rug, the air thick with the scent of aged leather and polished wood. A single lamp cast a feeble glow across the room, illuminating shelves lined with leather-bound tomes, and a massive desk where Leonard sat, his silhouette a monolith of authority. The documents she'd unearthed trembled slightly in her grasp, their edges crisp against her fingertips, a silent arsenal she intended to wield. Her pulse thrummed with a mixture of dread and resolve as she crossed the threshold, the weight of her mission settling into her bones. Leonard's head lifted, his gray eyes narrowing beneath bushy brows. A predator assessing prey. His fingers steepled atop the desk, the glint of a gold ring catching the light, and his voice emerged, low and gravelly. "What brings you here, uninvited?" The question carried a sting, a challenge wrapped in civility. Tamia straightened, her chin tilting upward, the papers clutched like a shield. She laid them before him, the rustle of paper breaking the silence, and met his gaze with a steadiness she hadn't known she possessed. "These prove what you did," she declared, her tone firm yet laced with an undercurrent of anguish. The man's lips curled into a thin smirk, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He leaned forward, scanning the documents with a practiced eye, his fingers tracing the faded ink. A moment passed, then he rose, his chair scraping against the floor, and seized the papers with a swift motion. The hearth's flames roared as he thrust them into the fire, the edges curling and blackening under the heat. "Proof of nothing," he snarled, his voice rising with a venomous edge. "Just the ravings of a woman who couldn't hold her own." Tamia's breath caught, her hands clenching into fists as the evidence dissolved into ash, but she refused to retreat, her stance unyielding. Miss May's earlier words echoed in her mind, a lifeline amid the rising tide of rage. Leonard's confession came like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile calm. "I arranged it all," he admitted, his tone chillingly matter-of-fact. "The car, the crash. Her death was necessary to secure what's mine. She was a liability, a stain on this family's name. The revelation struck Tamia like a physical blow, her vision blurring as the room seemed to tilt. The image of her mother, vibrant and defiant, clashed with the cold calculation before her, and a sob lodged in her throat. Yet beneath the grief, a spark of fury ignited, fueling her resolve to unearth the full extent of his treachery. Leonard paced, his shadow dancing across the walls, a predator reveling in his dominance. She thought she could claim what wasn't hers, he continued, his voice dripping with contempt. A bastard child with dreams above her station. I gave her a choice, sign or suffer. She chose poorly. Tamia's nails dug into her palms, the pain grounding her as she processed the cruelty of his words. The study's opulence, velvet drapes, gilded frames, felt like a mockery, a shrine to the wealth built on her mother's ruin. Her chest heaved, a storm brewing within, but she held her tongue, waiting for the right moment to strike back. The door creaked again, and Miss May slipped inside, her presence a quiet anchor. Her eyes, lined with years of service, met Tamia's, and she nodded subtly, a signal of solidarity. I saw it happen, the older woman whispered, her voice trembling but firm. The night before the crash, Leonard paid off the driver. I heard the deal myself. Money for silence. The confirmation hit Tamia like a wave, washing away any lingering doubt. She turned to Leonard, her gaze piercing through his smug facade, and felt a surge of empowerment. The truth, though devastating, was now hers to wield. Leonard's smirk faltered, his composure cracking under the weight of May's testimony. You old fool, he spat, rounding on the housekeeper. Your word against mine holds no sway. Yet the tremor in his voice betrayed his bravado, and Tamia seized the opportunity. It's enough to start, she countered, her voice steady despite the tempest within. Enough to make you answer for what you've done. The room seemed to shrink, the air charged with tension as she stood toe-to-toe with the man who had orchestrated her mother's demise, her spirit a beacon against his darkness. The fire crackled, casting erratic shadows that danced across Leonard's face, highlighting the lines of a life built on deceit. Tamia's mind whirled, piecing together the fragments May had provided, the hushed bribes, the staged accident, the erasure of her mother's legacy. Each detail fueled her determination, a fire that burned brighter with every breath. She glanced at May, whose nod reaffirmed her resolve, and felt a kinship with the woman who had borne witness to the same injustice. Together they formed a fragile alliance, a bulwark against the tyranny that had defined her life. Leonard sank back into his chair, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the armrests. You think you can undo decades with a few words? He challenged, his tone a mix of defiance and fear. Tamia stepped closer, her shadow falling across his desk, her presence a quiet threat. I'll do more than that, she replied, her voice a low growl. I'll tear down the lies you've built. The promise hung between them, a vow sealed in the flickering light, and she felt the weight of her mother's spirit urging her onward, a silent cheer from beyond the grave. The study's silence stretched, broken only by the faint tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. Tamia's gaze never wavered, her heart pounding with a rhythm of justice. May moved to her side, her presence a steadying force, and together they faced the man whose power had once seemed unassailable. The documents might be gone, but the truth lived in their memories, a weapon sharper than any paper. Tamia's thoughts turned to the path ahead, confrontations, revelations, a battle for what was rightfully hers. The room's grandeur faded into insignificance, overshadowed by the strength she drew from the past. As she turned to leave, the doorframe seemed to frame her like a portal to a new destiny. Leonard's voice called after her, a final attempt to assert control. You'll regret this, he warned, but the threat rang hollow, diluted by the crack in his armor. Tamia paused, glancing back with a steely resolve. Regret is yours to carry, she shot back, her words a dagger of retribution. May followed, her steps a quiet echo, and together they stepped into the corridor, the study's oppressive air giving way to a breath of freedom. The hallway stretched before them, its walls adorned with portraits of Grayson's ancestors, each face a silent witness to the legacy she now challenged. Tamia's mind buzzed with plans, her spirit buoyed by the truth May had confirmed. The journey ahead would be fraught with peril, but the revelation of Leonard's crime had lit a path, a trail of light through the darkness he had cast. Her steps grew firmer, the key from the attic still a talisman in her pocket, and she felt the stirrings of a fight that would redefine her world. The truth, once a shadow, now shone as a beacon, guiding her toward a reckoning with the man who had stolen her mother's life. The kitchen of the Grayson estate hummed with the low drone of a flickering fluorescent light, its pale glow casting jagged patterns across the chipped linoleum floor. Tamia Jackson stood at the counter, her hands submerged in soapy water, scrubbing a stack of porcelain plates with a vigor that belied her exhaustion. The faint clatter of dishes mingled with the distant murmur of voices from the dining room, where the family's latest gathering unfolded in oblivious splendor. Steam rose from the sink, curling around her face, but it did little to warm the chill that had settled in her bones since the confrontation. Her focus wavered as a small figure shuffled into the room, his sneakers scuffing the tiles. Jaden lingered near the doorway, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and longing, his slight frame hunched as if to shield himself from an unseen blow. His hearing impairment left him reliant on the subtle cues of her movements, and he raised a tentative hand, fingers forming a shaky sign for safe. Tamia dried her hands on a threadbare towel, her heart twisting at the sight of him, and knelt to meet his gaze. "We're okay, little man," she signed back, her gestures slow and deliberate, infused with a tenderness that masked her inner turmoil. His lips curved into a fragile smile, but the tension in his shoulders lingered, a silent testament to the cruelty he'd endured. A sharp laugh pierced the quiet, and Clarice's voice sliced through the wall, her words dripping with disdain. "That woman's cooking is barely fit for the dogs. Imagine raising a child like that." The remark stung, a venomous dart aimed not just at Tamia but at Jaden, whose presence seemed to offend the family's polished facade. Tamia's jaw clenched, her fingers curling into the towel as she rose, her mind racing with a plan to shield her son from their barbs. The kitchen's confines felt like a cage, the walls closing in with each insult that filtered through, yet she refused to let their scorn define her boy. She guided Jaden to a stool, his small form settling with a sigh, and pulled a chair close, her knees brushing his. "They don't see you like I do," she whispered, her voice a soft balm against the harshness beyond the door. His hands moved again, spelling out hate with a tremble, and she caught his wrist gently, shaking her head. "Not forever," she promised, her eyes locking with his, a vow etched in the depths of her gaze. The need to escape this toxic haven surged within her, a maternal instinct that overpowered the weariness dragging at her limbs. The back door creaked as Miss May slipped inside, her apron dusted with flour, her presence a quiet refuge. She carried a worn ledger, its pages yellowed but intact, and slid it across the counter toward Tamia. "This might help," she murmured, her voice a conspiratorial hush. "Notes from your mama's fight, dates, names, a trail to follow." Tamia's fingers brushed the leather cover, the texture rough against her skin, and she felt a surge of gratitude toward the woman who'd become her ally. The ledger promised a weapon, a means to gather the evidence needed to confront the forces arrayed against her. Jaden leaned closer, his curiosity piqued, and Tamia opened the book, revealing scrawled entries, meetings, threats, a signature under duress. Her pulse quickened as she traced the lines, each word a thread in the tapestry of her mother's struggle. Miss May pointed to a name, a driver long silenced, and nodded. "He took the money and ran, but I kept this." The revelation fueled Tamia's determination, her mind spinning with a strategy to weave these fragments into a case against Leonard. She glanced at Jaden, his trust in her a silent encouragement, and steeled herself for the battle ahead. The kitchen's warmth contrasted with the cold resolve settling in her chest as she tucked the ledger into her bag. Clarice's voice grew louder, a tirade about the evening's fare, and Tamia's grip tightened on the strap. She turned to Jaden, signing, "We're leaving soon." Her movements swift and sure. His eyes brightened, a spark of hope breaking through his earlier despair, and she felt a swell of protectiveness. The family's rejection had wounded him deeply, but she would not let it define his future. Her plan crystallized, escape, then strike back with the truth. A shadow fell across the threshold and Marcus appeared, his broad frame filling the doorway. His blue eyes, once warm with affection, now held a flicker of guilt as he stepped inside. "Tamia," he began, his voice low, "I'm sorry for what they said." The apology hung between them, fragile and unconvincing. She faced him, her stance firm, the ledger a secret weight against her side. "Sorry doesn't change it," she replied, her tone edged with steel. "You stood by while they tore us apart." His shoulders slumped, and he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "I loved you once. Still do, in my way," he admitted, his words a confession torn from a conflicted soul. "But Jaden, they see him as a burden, and I couldn't fight them all." The admission cut deep, a reminder of the man who had courted her for her spirit, only to abandon her when his family's prejudice surfaced. Tamia's chest tightened, but she refused to let his regret sway her. "Then you chose them," she said, her voice steady, turning away to focus on Jaden. The boy watched the exchange, his hands still, sensing the tension. Tamia knelt again, signing reassurance, her fingers dancing with purpose. Marcus lingered, his presence a silent plea, but she dismissed him with a glance, her priority clear. The kitchen's confines seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in with the weight of his cowardice. Yet she found strength in her son's unwavering gaze. Miss May moved to the stove, stirring a pot as if to mask the moment, her quiet support a lifeline. Tamia rose, her decision firm, and began gathering supplies. Bread, a jar of preserves, anything to sustain them on the road ahead. Jaden mimicked her, his small hands reaching for a napkin, and she smiled despite the ache in her heart. The family's voices grew distant, their laughter a fading echo, but the sting of their words lingered. She packed the ledger carefully, its pages a promise of retribution, and turned to Miss May. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion, receiving a nod in return. The back door beckoned, a portal to freedom, and Tamia paused, her hand on the knob. Jaden tugged at her sleeve, his trust a beacon in the dim light, and she felt a surge of purpose. Marcus's footsteps retreated, his silence a final abandonment, but she refused to dwell on it. The kitchen's warmth faded as she stepped into the cool night. The ledger pressed against her side, her son at her heel. The journey ahead loomed large, a path forged by maternal love and a quest for justice, and she embraced it with a quiet ferocity that promised to reshape their world. The night air hung thick with the scent of damp earth as Tamia Jackson slipped through the shadowed alley behind the Grayson estate, her breath visible in the cool stillness. The ledger pressed against her chest, its leather cover a silent promise beneath her coat, while the faint rustle of leaves overhead masked her hurried steps. Her heart thudded with a mix of anticipation and dread, the weight of her decision to flee pulling at her limbs. Jaden clung to her side, his small hand gripping hers, his silent trust a tether in the darkness. The mansion's silhouette loomed like a watchful giant, its windows aglow with the remnants of the evening's revelry, a stark reminder of the peril awaiting within. A sudden creak shattered the quiet, and Clarice emerged from the rear porch, her silhouette framed by the doorway's light, her voice a sharp whip. "Where do you think you're going, you insolent fool?" The accusation sliced through the air, and Tamia froze, her pulse racing as footsteps echoed closer. Leonard appeared beside his daughter, his towering frame exuding menace, his eyes glinting with cold fury. "You dare steal from us?" he growled, his hand reaching for the bag slung over her shoulder. Tamia sidestepped, her reflexes sharp, but the confrontation had begun, a clash that reverberated through the stillness. Jaden pressed against her leg, his breath shallow, and Tamia's protective instinct surged. She clutched the bag tighter, the ledger's edges digging into her palm, and faced them with a defiant glare. Clarice lunged forward, her fingers snatching at the strap, her nails grazing Tamia's wrist. "Give it back, you thieving wretch," she hissed, her tone laced with venom. The struggle intensified, the bag tearing slightly as Tamia yanked it free, her strength fueled by a mother's desperation. Leonard's hand clamped down on her arm, his grip ironclad, but she twisted away, her resolve hardening with each second. The alley's shadows deepened as the scuffle drew attention, and Marcus materialized from the gloom, his presence a reluctant specter. His face, pale under the moonlight, betrayed a tumult of emotions, guilt, anger, and a flicker of the love he'd once professed. "Tamia, stop this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "You can't win against them." His words stung, a reminder of his earlier confession, and she glared at him, her chest heaving. "You chose their side," she retorted, her tone a blade of accusation. "I'll fight for what's mine, and for him." She nodded toward Jaden, whose wide eyes reflected the tension. Leonard's laughter cut through the exchange, a harsh bark that echoed off the brick walls. "You think a crippled boy and a runaway servant can challenge me?" His words dripped with scorn, and Clarice smirked, stepping closer to block their path. Tamia's mind raced, seeking an escape, her gaze darting to the narrow gap between the garage and the fence. The ledger's contents burned in her thoughts, a key to unraveling their dominion. And she refused to let it fall into their hands. Her free hand brushed Jaden's shoulder, a silent signal, and she prepared to bolt. A rustle from the undergrowth broke the standoff, and Miss May emerged, her apron stained with soil, a determined glint in her eyes. She held a small parcel wrapped in burlap, thrusting it toward Tamia with a whispered urgency. "Take this, another copy, hidden before they could destroy it." The weight of the bundle settled into Tamia's grasp, a lifeline amid the chaos, and she nodded gratefully. Clarice's shriek of outrage pierced the night as she lunged again, but Tamia ducked, pulling Jaden with her toward the gap, the parcel secure against her side. Marcus hesitated, his hand outstretched as if to intervene, but Leonard's sharp command halted him. "Stay out of it, boy!" The patriarch's voice boomed, and Marcus's shoulders sagged, his indecision a palpable barrier. Tamia seized the moment, guiding Jaden through the narrow passage, the rough wood scraping her arm. The alley opened into a side street, the cool air a welcome reprieve, but the sound of pursuit spurred her onward. Her lungs burned, yet she pressed forward, the burlap package a talisman of hope in her grip. The chase intensified, Leonard's shouts ringing out as Clarice's heels clacked against the pavement behind them. Tamia's legs ached, but she focused on Jaden's steady breathing beside her, his trust a silent strength. She veered toward a cluster of overgrown shrubs, crouching low to conceal them, her heart pounding in her ears. The footsteps grew closer, then faltered, and she held her breath, willing the darkness to shield them. Miss May's voice drifted faintly, a distraction buying them precious seconds, and Tamia's gratitude deepened for the ally who risked so much. A shadow loomed, and Marcus appeared again, his face etched with conflict. "Tamia, please," he whispered, kneeling beside the shrubs. "I loved you for your fire, your spirit, still do. But Jaden, they see his deafness as a flaw, and I couldn't stand against them." His confession spilled out, raw and broken, and she stared at him, her anger warring with the memory of their past. "Love doesn't abandon," she shot back, her voice low but fierce. "You let them shame him, and me." His head dropped, and she turned away, unwilling to let his remorse sway her resolve. The night grew still, the pursuers' voices fading as they veered off, misled by Miss May's ruse. Tamia exhaled, her body trembling with adrenaline, and checked on Jaden, his small hand still clasped in hers. The burlap parcel crinkled as she adjusted it, its contents a duplicate of the ledger's truth, a safeguard against their greed. Her mind whirred with the implications. Another chance to expose the injustice, to fight for her son's dignity. The street stretched before them, a path to freedom, and she rose, her spirit unbowed despite the night's trials. A distant shout snapped her back to alertness, and she pulled Jaden closer, her senses heightened. The Grayson Estates lights dimmed, a sign of their retreat, but the threat lingered like a storm on the horizon. Tamia's thoughts turned to the next step, finding safety, rallying support, and turning the evidence into action. The parcel's weight anchored her, a tangible link to the justice she sought, and she felt a surge of determination. Marcus's figure receded into the shadows, his silence a final severance. Yet it only steeled her resolve to protect what mattered most. The alley's end loomed, a gateway to the unknown, and Tamia paused, her breath steadying. The night's chill seeped through her coat, but a warmth bloomed within, born of defiance and love. Jaden's hand tightened around hers, his trust a silent vow, and she stepped forward, the burlap bundle a beacon in the darkness. The pursuit had tested her, but it had also forged her, sharpening her will into a weapon. With each stride, she carried not just herself and her son, but the legacy of a fight that would reshape their fate. The echoes of the night a prelude to the battle ahead. The soft glow of a single candle flickered across the worn table of a cramped attic room, its flame dancing in the draft that seeped through the cracked window. Tamia Jackson sat hunched over a stack of papers, the burlap-wrapped parcel unrolled beside her, its contents spilling forth like a map to redemption. The air carried the faint mustiness of old wood and the sharp tang of ink, a sanctuary carved out of necessity in the shadow of the Grayson estate. Her fingers traced the ledger's edges, the duplicate pages a lifeline she'd safeguarded through the night's chaos, while the quiet rasp of her breathing filled the space. Determination etched lines into her brow as she prepared to turn the tide. A legal pad rested under her elbow, its surface scribbled with notes in a hurried script, and she pored over them with the intensity of a scholar unraveling an ancient text. The dim light caught the glint of determination in her eyes, a fire stoked by the injustices she'd endured. She reached for a pencil, its tip scratching against the paper as she outlined her strategy, each stroke a step toward confrontation. The room's solitude offered a rare reprieve, a cocoon where she could steel herself for the battle ahead, her mind a whirl of tactics and resolve. The candle's wax dripped slowly, marking time as she immersed herself in the task. Jaden perched on a stool nearby, his small hands moving in fluid signs, a silent dialogue that bridged their worlds. His fingers danced with encouragement, spelling out strong with a confidence that belied his tender years. Tamia paused, offering him a warm smile, her heart swelling with pride at his resilience. She signed back, "We'll win." Her gestures deliberate, a promise sealed in the quiet space between them. His nod, accompanied by a faint grin, bolstered her spirits, and she returned to her work. The boy's presence a steady anchor amid the storm of her thoughts. The door creaked open, and a local attorney, Mr. Ellis, stepped inside, his gray suit rumpled, but his demeanor sharp. He carried a briefcase, its leather scuffed from years of service, and set it down with a thud that reverberated through the floorboards. "I've reviewed what you gave me," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "It's thin, but with Miss May's testimony, we might have a case." Tamia's gaze lifted, hope flickering within her as she pushed the ledger toward him. His fingers flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing, and she felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected ally. She rose, pacing the narrow confines, her shadow stretching across the wall like a sentinel. "They've taken everything," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "But this," she tapped the documents, "this is my mother's voice. I need to make them hear it." Mr. Ellis nodded, pulling out a chair and spreading the papers across the table. His pen scratched as he jotted notes, outlining a plan to summon the family for a reckoning. Tamia watched, her mind replaying the slights she'd borne, each memory a spur to her resolve. The attorney's presence lent a professional edge, transforming her raw determination into a structured assault. Jaden slid off his stool, moving to her side, and she knelt, her hands signing a question. "Ready?" His response came swiftly, a nod paired with yes, his trust a balm to her frayed nerves. She ruffled his hair gently, then turned back to Mr. Ellis, who handed her a script of sorts. Key points to press, questions to pose. The words felt foreign on her tongue as she practiced them aloud, her voice gaining strength with each repetition. The attic's stillness absorbed her rehearsal, a cocoon where she could hone her defiance into a weapon of words. A knock at the door jolted her, and Miss May entered, her apron swapped for a plain dress, her expression grave yet resolute. She carried a small tin box, its lid dented, and placed it before Tamia. "Memories your mama left," she explained, lifting the cover to reveal faded photographs and a locket. Tamia's breath caught as she lifted the pendant, its surface cool against her palm, a tangible echo of a lost bond. May's voice softened. She'd want you to wear it, to carry her fight. The gesture infused Tamia with a renewed vigor, and she fastened the locket around her neck, its weight a silent vow. The candle's flame wavered as a draft swept through, and Tamia stood pacing again, her mind churning with the confrontation to come. She rehearsed a line, her voice rising. You can't erase her legacy, testing its weight, its power. Mr. Ellis adjusted a phrase, suggesting a firmer tone, and she complied, her delivery growing bolder. The attic's walls seemed to pulse with her energy, a space transformed into a war room where strategy met emotion. Jaden watched, his hands still, absorbing the intensity, and she felt his silent support bolster her stance. Footsteps echoed from below, a reminder of the world beyond this haven, and Tamia's pulse quickened. She turned to Mr. Ellis, her voice steady. When do we call them? He checked his watch, calculating. Tomorrow at their gathering. We'll catch them off guard. The plan crystallized, a daring move to seize the moment, and she nodded, her mind racing with the faces she'd face. Leonard's cold stare, Clarice's sneer, Marcus's conflicted gaze. The locket rested against her collarbone, a talisman of strength, and she touched it, drawing courage from its quiet presence. Jaden tugged at her sleeve, his fingers spelling proud, and she knelt again, her eyes glistening. You make me proud too, she signed back, her heart swelling with love. The boy's resilience, forged in the crucible of their shared trials, mirrored her own, and she rose, her spirit fortified. Mr. Ellis packed his briefcase, offering a final nod of encouragement, while Miss May lingered, her presence a steadying force. The attic's dimness seemed to retreat, replaced by a glow of purpose as Tamia prepared to step into the fray. The candle sputtered, its wax pooling on the table, and she blew it out, plunging the room into a soft twilight. Her reflection flickered in a cracked mirror, her features hardened by resolve, the locket a gleam against her skin. She gathered the documents, her movements precise, and turned to Jaden, signing, Tomorrow we stand together. His affirmative gesture fueled her, and she felt the weight of the moment settle into her core. The night stretched ahead, a prelude to the clash she'd orchestrate, her mind a tapestry of strategy and emotion, woven with the threads of her mother's legacy. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, a faint chorus that seemed to urge her forward. Tamia stepped to the window, gazing at the mansion's distant lights, her silhouette a figure of defiance against the glass. The locket's cool metal pressed against her chest, a reminder of the fight she carried, and she exhaled, her breath fogging the pain. The path to tomorrow loomed, fraught with uncertainty, but she embraced it with a quiet ferocity, her spirit aflame, ready to illuminate the darkness of their oppression. With Jaden at her side and the truth in her hands, she prepared to face the storm head-on. The grand parlor of the Grayson estate thrummed with tension, its ornate walls adorned with ancestral portraits that seemed to judge the scene unfolding below. Tamia Jackson stood at the threshold, her silhouette framed by the arched doorway, the locket at her throat glinting faintly under the chandelier's harsh glare. The room buzzed with the low murmur of the gathered family, their elegant attire a stark contrast to the storm brewing in her chest. Her fingers brushed the edge of a leather satchel slung over her shoulder, its contents a volatile mix of resolve and retribution. The air crackled with anticipation as she stepped forward, her presence a ripple disrupting their poised complacency. Leonard dominated the head of the long mahogany table, his silver hair a crown of authority, his gaze a piercing lance as it fixed on her. Clarice lounged to his right, her crimson lips curled in a sneer, while Marcus hovered near the hearth, his broad frame taut with unease. The space felt like a battlefield, the polished surface of the table a no-man's land between them. Tamia's voice cut through the hum, steady and unyielding. You've ruled this house with lies long enough. The words hung heavy, drawing every eye to her, and she felt the weight of their scrutiny like a physical force. She reached into the satchel, withdrawing a framed keepsake from the attic, its glass surface reflecting the room's opulence. With a swift motion, Tamia slammed it down, the frame splintering with a sharp crack that silenced the assembly. Shards skittered across the table, glinting like fallen stars, and she seized a candlestick from the mantel, its wax still warm from the flame. Raising it high, her voice erupted, raw and commanding. You killed my mother for your empire. I'm not your shadow. I'm her roots. Nobody breaks us. The declaration reverberated, a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of their arrogance. Jaden darted from the corner, his small form weaving through the stunned onlookers, and threw his arms around her legs, his silent embrace a shield against the hostility. Leonard's face darkened, his fist slamming the table as he rose. "Insolent girl!" he roared, his voice a tidal wave of rage. Clarice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Marcus stepped forward, his expression a tumult of guilt and desperation. "Tamia, please," he pleaded, his tone fracturing. "This won't end well. Stop before it's too late." His words carried a plea, but she shook her head, her stance unmovable. The candlestick trembled in her grasp, its weight a symbol of her defiance, and she thrust it toward Leonard, her eyes blazing. "You stole her life, her legacy, and thought you could bury me too." Her voice quivered with emotion, yet held a steel edge that cut through his bluster. The room seemed to contract, the portraits on the walls looming like witnesses to a trial, their painted eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Jaden's grip tightened, his trust a silent anchor, and Tamia drew strength from his presence, her resolve hardening into an unbreakable core. Marcus lunged, his hand outstretched to wrest the candlestick away, his face contorted with a mix of love and fear. "I loved you, still do," he stammered, his confession spilling forth. "But Jaden's condition? They turned it against us, and I couldn't fight them." The admission hung between them, a fragile thread of their past, snapping under the weight of his cowardice. Tamia's gaze softened for a fleeting moment, then hardened as she pulled back, the candlestick steady in her hand. "Love doesn't abandon," she retorted, her words a lash that left him reeling. "You chose their poison over us." Leonard's roar interrupted a bellow that shook the chandelier's crystals. "Enough of this nonsense!" He advanced, his bulk a looming threat, but Tamia stood her ground, the candlestick a barrier between them. Clarice shrieked, her voice a piercing wail. "She's deranged! Get her out!" Yet no one moved, the family's unity fracturing under the weight of her accusations. The room pulsed with chaos, a cacophony of shouts and the clatter of overturned chairs. But Tamia's focus remained locked on Leonard, her voice rising above the din. "You can't erase her memory with your wealth," she declared, her tone a clarion call. "I'll take back what's mine, her truth, her honor." The candlestick's flame flickered, casting wild shadows across the walls, and Jaden pressed closer, his silent support a bulwark against the onslaught. Leonard's hand shot out, aiming to seize her arm, but she sidestepped, the movement graceful yet defiant, the candlestick clattering to the floor as she steadied herself. The sound echoed, punctuation to her stand, and the room fell into a stunned hush. Marcus dropped to his knees, his face buried in his hands, a broken figure amid the opulence. "I should have stood with you," he whispered, his voice lost in the silence. But Tamia turned away, her attention fixed on Leonard. The patriarch's chest heaved, his authority crumbling under the weight of her words, and he sank back into his chair, his defeat a silent concession. Clarice's protests faded into a mutter, her bravado evaporating, and the family's facade cracked, revealing the fragility beneath. Tamia knelt, gathering Jaden into her arms, his warmth a solace against the cold fury that had driven her. The shattered frame lay scattered, a testament to her breaking point, and she rose, her posture regal despite the chaos. The locket at her throat pulsed with each heartbeat, a reminder of the legacy she fought for, and she felt a surge of triumph mingled with the ache of battle. The room's tension lingered, a palpable force, but she stood tall, her voice a quiet thunder. "This isn't over," she warned, her gaze sweeping the assembly. "Not until justice is served." The chandelier's light dimmed, as if mirroring the family's waning power, and Tamia stepped back, Jaden at her side. Marcus remained on the floor, his head bowed, a figure of lost potential, while Leonard's glare promised retribution. She reached into her satchel, withdrawing the divorce papers she'd prepared, and slid them across the table with a steady hand. "Sign it," she commanded, her tone brooking no argument. The act marked a severance, a declaration of independence that reverberated through the parlor, and she felt the chains of their control begin to loosen. Jaden's hand found hers again, his fingers tracing a sign for strong, and she squeezed back, her resolve unshaken. The family's silence was a hollow victory, their power diminished by her stand, and she turned toward the door, her steps measured. The parlor's grandeur faded into irrelevance, overshadowed by the strength she'd reclaimed. Outside, the night air awaited, a canvas for the next chapter of her fight, and Tamia embraced it with a fierce determination, the echo of her cry lingering like a battle hymn in the stillness. The crisp morning breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and cedar as it swept through the open windows of a modest building on the city's edge. Tamia Jackson stood at the threshold, her silhouette framed by the sunlight streaming in, the locket at her throat catching the golden rays. The structure hummed with life, its walls adorned with vibrant murals crafted by small hands, and the air buzzed with the chatter of young voices. A newly hung sign swayed gently above the door, its bold letters proclaiming Lorraine's legacy, a beacon of hope carved from struggle. Her chest swelled with quiet pride as she surveyed the space, the culmination of a battle hard won. Inside, the room teemed with energy, children of all shades moving with purpose, their laughter a melody that danced around the wooden beams. A boy with dark curls, Jaden, knelt by a canvas, his brushstrokes bold yet tender, his hearing impairment no barrier to the creativity spilling from his soul. Tamia watched him, her heart lifting at the sight of his focus, his spirit unshackled by the past. The space, once a forgotten warehouse, now pulsed with possibility, its transformation a testament to her tenacity. She adjusted the collar of her simple blouse, the fabric a quiet contrast to the grandeur she'd left behind. A soft creak announced Miss May's arrival, her weathered hands carrying a tray of lemonade, her smile a warm glow amid the bustle. "They're thriving here," she remarked, her voice a gentle ripple, and Tamia nodded, accepting a glass with a grateful incline of her head. The older woman's presence had been a cornerstone, her wisdom guiding the fledgling venture, and Tamia felt a surge of gratitude. The children gathered around, their eyes bright with curiosity, and she handed out cups, her movements graceful, a leader emerging from the ashes of adversity. The door swung open again, and Marcus stepped inside, his broad frame hesitant under a worn jacket, his blue eyes shadowed with regret. He approached slowly, his hands clasped as if in supplication, and Tamia's posture stiffened, her gaze cool but steady. "I came to say I'm sorry," he began, his words halting, "for not being the man you needed." The confession hung between them, a fragile offering, but she remained silent, her focus drifting to Jaden, who continued his painting, oblivious to the tension. Her lips pressed into a thin line, a boundary drawn with quiet strength. "I loved you," Marcus continued, his voice breaking, "and I failed you both. Can you ever forgive me?" The plea tugged at her, an echo of a love once shared, but she shook her head, her resolve unyielding. "Forgiveness doesn't erase what you let happen," she replied, her tone firm yet devoid of malice. "We've built something better without you." The rejection stung him, his shoulders slumping, and he nodded, stepping back as if to retreat into the past. Tamia turned away, her attention returning to the children, their innocence a shield against his remorse. Outside, the street stretched quietly, save for the occasional rustle of leaves, and a figure lingered near a parked car, his silhouette unmistakable. Leonard's presence cast a long shadow, his silver hair glinting in the sunlight, his expression a mask of calculation. Tamia's gaze hardened as she watched him, the locket at her throat a reminder of the victory she'd claimed. The court's decision had granted her a portion of the inheritance, a hard-fought prize, and she'd poured it into this haven, a refuge for those like her son. Yet his watchful eyes hinted at schemes to unfold, a threat simmering beneath the surface. The children's voices rose in a spontaneous song, their harmony weaving through the room, and Tamia joined them, her alto blending with their youthful tones. Jaden set his brush aside, his mural a burst of color depicting a tree with deep roots. a symbol of resilience that mirrored her journey. She knelt beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, and signed, "Beautiful," her fingers graceful against his cheek. His grin widened, a beacon of joy, and she felt the weight of her past life, replaced by a purpose that anchored her soul. Miss May moved to the window, her gaze following Leonard's retreat, and murmured, "He won't let this rest." Tamia nodded, her mind already anticipating the next move, but she refused to let fear dictate her path. The building's walls, freshly painted and sturdy, stood as a fortress of her making, a legacy built not just for herself, but for every child who'd been overlooked. She straightened her stance, a quiet declaration, and addressed the group, her voice carrying a warmth that belied the steel within. "This is our home now, where no one is turned away." A young girl approached, her notebook open to a sketch of a dress, and Tamia smiled, guiding her hand to refine the lines. The act felt like a bridge to her mother's artistry, a thread of creativity passed down through generations. The room filled with the scratch of pencils and the rustle of paper, a symphony of new beginnings, and she reveled in the sound, her spirit buoyant. Jaden rejoined the fray, his fingers tracing shapes in the air, and she watched, her heart swelling with pride at his uninhibited expression. The afternoon waned, the sunlight softening into a golden haze, and Tamia stepped onto the porch. The cool wood beneath her feet a grounding force. She gazed at the street, the car now gone, but the sense of Leonard's watchful eye lingered. Her fingers brushed the locket, its metal a talisman of strength, and she exhaled, her breath a whisper of resolve. The court victory had been a step, but this sanctuary was her triumph, a place where roots could grow deep and unhindered. The children's laughter drifted out, a melody of hope, and she leaned against the railing, her silhouette a guardian against the shadows. Inside, the mural took shape, its colors bold against the white wall, and Tamia rejoined the group, her hands joining the creative chaos. A boy with a limp approached, his grin wide, and she encouraged his contribution, her voice a gentle guide. The space transformed under their collective effort, a canvas of dreams where differences were celebrated. She glanced at Jaden, his focus unwavering, and felt a surge of purpose. Knowing this was the future she'd fought for, a world where he could thrive. The day drew to a close, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the room. Tamia stood back, surveying the progress, her chest filled with a quiet satisfaction. Marcus had vanished, his apology a fleeting note in the symphony of her life, and she dismissed it with a shake of her head. Leonard's threat loomed, a distant thunder, but she met it with a steady gaze, her legacy now etched in the laughter and art around her. The locket rested against her skin, a pulse of memory, and she turned to the children, her voice rising. "Keep creating. Your roots are unbreakable." The night settled in, the building's lights a soft beacon against the dark, and Tamia lingered on the porch, her thoughts a tapestry of past and future. The wind carried a whisper of challenge, but she embraced it, her spirit a flame that would not be extinguished. With Jaden at her side and the legacy of her mother alive in every brushstroke, she faced the horizon, ready for whatever lay ahead, her roots now a foundation for a new dawn. As we close this chapter of Tamia's journey in Unbroken Roots, we invite you to share your thoughts. Did her courage resonate with you? What moments stirred your heart? Thank you for joining us on this emotional ride. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more tales of resilience and redemption, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care.